William Merritt Chase was born in the little town of Williamsburg, Franklin County, Indiana, on November 1, 1849. His father, David Hester Chase, was a native of Indiana, and his mother, Sarah Swaim, was also from Indiana. He was the eldest of 7 children. The family coming from a very rural town was hardly a place where the arts might flourish, although it was the custom of the day in schools for children to practice drawing. The Chase family remained in the town until William was 12 years old. He was already taken more seriously concerning his drawing skills, which showed early promise of a future that didn't seem likely in America's western states of 1861. Few books or courses were available except the crude illustrations from books and advertisement posters. When William Chase was 12 years of age, his family moved to Indianapolis. The larger town broadened the boy's horizon somewhat. His father was a shoe merchant, and through the move, more options were opening up. It was at 19 years old that William thought to be a sailor, which pleased his father, and after some manoeuvring found himself with a friend off to Annapolis to board a ship. No doubt that desire to be a sailor was but an expression of the imaginative impulse of the boy born inland, to whom the unseen ocean stood for mystery, romance, escape, what author Lafcadio Hearn calls the mesmerism of the sea, for contact with the actual life soon proved that he had no real liking for it. The 2 boys were accepted and were placed on the school ship Portsmouth, which was then starting on a 3-month cruise. But very soon after the ship had left land, William Chase found that he had made a sad mistake. It is an interesting parallel to James McNeill Whistler, who began similarly opting for an education outside of the desired art world. Soon the mistake of becoming a sailor was recognized, and confided to his father it was not a life for him, and he returned for a time to help his father at his shop. But longing to further his artistic goals, his father sought out a working artist, who promptly discouraged the idea and left William perplexed. But he resolved to study harder on his own until he met with Ben Hayes, another artist that approved of his talent. Chase studied for several months with Benjamin Hayes. Needless to state, art as studied at that period was as far from the art school curriculum of today as one author noted. But through Mr. Hayes, a letter of introduction was provided that would greatly assist William as he ventured off to New York to study art formally. Upon reaching New York, Chase made his way at once to the studio of Joe Eaton. Eaton was just about to sail for Europe when the young man arrived. He declined at first to have anything to do with his prospective pupil, but when he saw the boy's work, he gave him the key to his studio and told him to go in and use it until he came back, so young Chase took possession of the place. He also worked in the classes of the Academy of Design. For almost 2 years he studied with Eaton, the second year taking a studio of his own in the Young Men's Christian Association building. Studio life in New York at that period was scarcely in its beginning. The studio with a skylight was practically unknown. The painters and students had rooms, if possible, with a north light, but frequently without, in which they painted landscapes indoors, portraits, or ideal heads without a model. A number of them lived in the beautiful old university building on Washington Square, now destroyed, but associated for all time with the name of Samuel Morse. Dim lamps in the side streets had a strong suggestion of London. Booth's Theatre, at 6th Avenue and 23rd Street, harboured a number of artists, among them George Inness. The Young Men's Christian Association building at East 23rd Street, where Chase lived and painted, the second studio building in New York, was then new and full of artists. On the opposite corner of 4th Avenue and 23rd Street was the new building of the Academy of Design, built in the style of the Doge's Palace. Art atmosphere did not exist in New York in the early 70s. Models were almost unattainable in those days. The undraped model, the model for the figure, did not exist as such, although certain pictures and pieces of sculpture done during that period proved that such models were in some way obtainable. It was usually the case that a model was coaxed into service of janitors or children as portrait models. Nevertheless, the regular professional model did not become an established fact until a number of years afterward. In 1871, Chase exhibited his first pictures, a portrait and a still life of Catawba grapes and blue plums. Rosina Sherwood, who was one of Chase's first pupils at the 10th Street studio, recalls that Chase, in describing his artistic efforts of those days, said that every grape was highly polished and showed the reflections of surrounding objects. The difference between that still life of 1871 and, say, the Belgian melon painting of Chase's later years would constitute a whole history of the development of his art. Chase returns home briefly from New York to family now in St. Louis, where Chase shared the studio of James William Patterson. It was there that he saw the canvases of one John Mulvaney, who had studied in Munich, and with that perception he saw a new light. An idea to pilgrimage to Europe. Before long he attracted the attention of some generous men of means, who raised a sufficient sum of money among them to send the boy to Europe to study. In return the young man was to paint a picture for each patron at the conclusion of his period of study, a condition of course gladly carried out. Although the majority of men studying in Europe at that period were in Paris, Chase, like Walter Schirlaw, Frank Duveneck and John Twachtman, elected to study in Munich. Many Germans and the children of German emigrants made Munich seem nearer than Paris. In any case, Chase departed to the Bavarian city, and there his real art life may be said to have begun. Chase reached Munich at a time when new ideas were germinating. He entered the Munich Royal Academy and was also a student of Carl von Piloty, a painter of vast historical canvases in subject, who was then believed to be a great master. But although he studied with Piloty and Kaulbach, it was William Liebel who represented in Munich what Couture did in Paris, who influenced Chase and the other impressionable young students in the 70s. After the Franco-Prussian War of 1871, a number of American art students went to Paris and Munich, but the Munich influence seems to have been felt in American art a little before the French school made its impression. There were about 40 American students in Munich at the time Chase went there, but soon the number was increased to 70. Frederick Dielman and William Chase registered at the Royal Academy on the same day. The academy was a building that had been an old monastery, divided off into stalls for the students. Duveneck, who was in Munich when Chase arrived, but who went away for a time shortly afterward, recalls the swiftness of the young man's progress, for when Chase entered the art school he went into the antique class like any beginner. But when Duveneck returned a few months later, the young American student had become a celebrity. Indeed, Chase and Currier were then considered the most talented of the Munich students. As we move along into William Chase's artistic journey, it would be a very long dissertation into the highly productive career of the great painter. So in the following pictures, we present a look at some highlights of the varied subjects he painted. Chase was as adept at portraiture as he was with still life and plein-air painting. His interior scenes are wonderful and very deftly rendered, having the sense of the fleeting moments in a studio of family, children, or the still life arrangement. Chase was an avid collector of things to paint. Bric-a-brac, as his friend Robert Blum would chide him about of his many purchases as they travelled abroad together with a small group of fellow artisans. Chase lived a productive life and was a beloved teacher to many pupils from his New York studio, or off into the Shinnecock Hills of New York for open-air classes. In the spring of 1916 he gave a talk to the students of the Art League, his last. In May he went to the meeting of the Federation of Arts in Washington, the last public function that he was to attend. In June the New York University conferred the degree of Doctor of Laws upon him. That same month he painted a portrait for the Allied Bazaar. He stopped by his studio. A student asked, "You aren't going to try to paint while you are there?" exclaimed a distressed pupil who was in the studio, but Chase answered with his pathetic cheerfulness, "Of course I am. There's nothing like painting, nothing like work." This while he ventured to Atlantic City for a short visit. Later in the fall, Chase was too weak to continue, but he had a final visit from his longtime student Irving Ramsay Wiles. Then a few days later, William Merritt Chase passed. We hope you enjoyed the presentation and remember to subscribe to our channel. It will help us to grow with more stories for the art aficionado.